YouTube, it's Zoe, and today I'm going to share with you all my favorite audiobooks. I have gotten really into audiobooks over the past year, and I finally feel like I've read enough to give you all some good recommendations. But first, I would like to talk about today's sponsor, Libby. I love Libby, not just because they are today's sponsor, but because I use them all the time. They are a completely free app created by Overdrive and provided through your local public library. So if you want to check out ebooks, including graphic novels and audiobooks for free, this is the app to use. I am so dang excited to work with Libby because my entire family has been using Libby for years, and I was even able to use it when I was away at university and when I was in London studying abroad and interning abroad. I was still able to access things from my local library and save all of that money. All I needed was my library card. It was nice to be able to multitask, like being able to listen to audiobooks during my 45-minute commute or doing dishes. Libby is available for all Android and Apple devices, and it is able to sync across multiple devices. So if you start an ebook on your phone and want to continue on your iPad or something like that, it will keep your place. There are multiple ways to read ebooks, including night mode, so you don't strain your eyes when you are reading deep into the night, and also there is a font to help those with dyslexia. There is a sleep mode timer for audiobooks, which I use all the time because I have trouble falling asleep and audiobooks really help me out, and there is a playback speed adjuster so you can listen to it slower or quicker depending on the narrator, and you can read or listen to any sample of any book before you borrow it. So if you're not sure if you're going to like a certain narrator or you're not sure if you're going to like the writing style of a book, you don't have to waste one of your borrows. Another fun thing about Libby, I'm just going to keep on gushing, but if you have multiple library cards, you can put all of them into Libby and access your multiple libraries. So you can have so many books at your disposal. Some libraries will even give you a library card within Libby, so you don't need to leave your house to get free books. It will automatically return books so you don't rack up any fines. Wow. Wow. I love my library. I love Libby. I'm so happy right now. Thank you, Libby. If you want to know more about this app, I will include more information in the description. Without any further ado, let's stop this gushing and let's talk about my favorite audiobooks. With the books I'm talking about today, I recommend, if you can, listen to the audiobook rather than physically read them, even though they're all great books in and of itself. But the narrators of the audiobook and the production level really brings the story to a next level, and it really makes these books into an experience. I love it, and that's why I'm recommending them today, obviously. My first recommendation is actually the book that I most recently read, and that is Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Alire Sainz. Guess who narrates this audiobook? Lin-Manuel Miranda, and boy howdy, he does a very enthusiastic performance, and I was living. This takes place in 1980s Texas, and it's written like a poetic diary. Our main character, Aristotle, is very introspective, and he really is figuring out who he is, where his place is in the world, and he's discovering more about himself through his relationships with his friends and family, specifically with his new friend named Dante. Like Aristotle, Dante is a Mexican-American teen, and Aristotle really learns a lot from his unique perspective on life, on being Mexican-American, and on being unapologetically himself. He really has a sense of who he is. This is a quiet book. It focuses much more on the characters than a wild plot, although some wild things do happen. It takes place from the summer that Aristotle and Dante meet and become friends to a year later, and how their characters develop, how their relationships develop, what changes in the year. I know some people might think this is a spoiler, but I really want people to know, in case they want to find more representation, that Aristotle and Dante do get in a relationship together. It is a very slow burn, but it's worth it. I think that if you enjoy The Perks of Being a Wallflower, you will really enjoy this one as well. They are both quiet books that focus on introverted and introspective main characters, Aristotle and Charlie from that book, and both of them learn much more about themselves themselves through looking at other people. Now, talking about the narration of this book, Lin-Manuel Miranda is so enthusiastic, and it made me so excited to sit down and listen to this book because, like I said, this reads like poetry, and he is a lyricist. He really kind of writes poetry basically, and so he knew the rhythm and the cadence of how to say things, and it just added a new level of meaning to the words. It was a really nice experience. My next recommendation is an iconic book, but an even more iconic audiobook. It is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I've read a few of her books and I've enjoyed every single one. This one was no exception. This takes place in the 1970s and follows the rise and eventual breakup of the rock band Daisy Jones and the Six. No one has ever talked about why the band broke up because they were at the height of their fame. That is until now. This is written as if it is a tell-all biography on the band. It is a collection of interviews with each member of the band and their close family and friends and managers, everybody in the know. The audiobook is narrated by a full cast, many of whom are Hollywood actors, such as Karen, one of my favorite characters. She's narrated by Judy Greer, who you might know as the best friend in so many early 2000s rom-coms like 27 Dresses, 13 Going on 30, and The Wedding Planner. Yes, she was in all of them. Because they are written as interviews, you can see how each member of the band and even the close friends and family member interpret situations differently, or they're just straight up lying to make themselves look better. And throughout reading this, you have to decide who you believe. And I usually believed Karen. Again, I really enjoyed her. Also, I loved Camila, I loved Daisy. All of them were very flawed characters because this is the age of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Emphasis on the drugs for some of these people. I love seeing that nobody's perfect, as Hannah Montana so eloquently said. They were truly complex characters with complex relationship dynamics, like the relationship between Billy, Camila, and Daisy. Wow. We also get so many amazing quotes, most of them from Daisy herself. I actually wrote quite a few of them in my journal because they really spoke to me. I cried several times while reading this. I first read the book and then I listened to the audiobook, but I think that it might be better to do the opposite. So if you're a fan of music, the 1970s, or you really want to read about damaged people trying to succeed in their creative ventures and their personal relationships, I very much recommend this. Also, Reese Witherspoon is adapting this into a mini-series on Amazon. I'm not sure when, but I am here waiting. I'm not gonna leave this spot until we get it because I need it in my life. I don't know how I can go on without it. Now, if you're in the mood for some YA paranormal fantasy complete with ghosts and superpowers set in 1920s New York City, I recommend The Diviners by Libby Bray. I don't know what other book I could have been describing because it was very specific. Fun fact, the narrator who voiced Camila in Daisy Jones and the Six actually narrates this audiobook, and I love her voice, January Lavoie. So this follows a 17-year-old flapper named Evie O'Neill who was shipped off to live with her uncle in New York City after causing havoc at home due to her partying and use of her superpower, being able to read the passive objects that she is touching. Her uncle runs a museum of the occult, so some freaky things start happening. One day, an evil spirit is released and people just happened to become murdered across New York City, so Evie and her group of friends who might or might not have superpowers try to track down this serial killer. I love that in this book, New York City is fleshed out. We aren't just hearing about events through Evie's point of view. We get the perspectives of people from all different backgrounds. So we have groups of recent immigrants. We have one character who is Black and from Harlem. He's a poet and I love him so much. We have a gay character. I think in the second book we get the perspective of someone who is Chinese and disabled. I have not read the second book yet. I really want to. I hear that each book just keeps on getting better. Also, the fourth and final book, King of Crows, comes out in 2020, back to the 20s. I think that is just so poetic and beautiful. She really planned it that way, I think. But I am trying to wait to read the second book until around Halloween time because this is the perfect Halloween read. It is spooky. We have these evil spirits named Naughty John who creeps me out. We have obviously murder, but it's not fully terrifying. I think you will be able to sleep after reading this book. There are so many fun 1920s flapper moments to really lighten the mood, and the relationships between all of the characters are really nice. They are all different personalities, but they fit together so well, and I love Memphis so much. And Jericho. Evie's cool too. She takes a moment to really get on board with, but all of them, except Naughty John, I love. The next audiobook that I want to recommend is Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, his memoir about growing up as a mixed-race child in South Africa during and after apartheid. Hypothetically, he should not exist because it was illegal to have mixed-race relations during apartheid, hence him being born a crime. Throughout this book, we see the ramifications of apartheid and how truly cruel it was. We see the history of his family, specifically focusing on his mother, who was totally fearless and kick butt. We see him growing up in poverty and going through a rebellious period. I love listening to the audiobooks of memoirs because more often than not, the author is the one narrating it, and it feels like we're sitting down for a cup of coffee together and they're just chatting to me about their life story. That is exactly what this felt like. His writing was so effortless and so casual. He was really able to balance the truly life and death moments with lighthearted ones spectacularly, which makes sense because he is a comedian, but I hadn't watched any of The Daily Show or his comedy specials or anything before reading this, so I wasn't sure if our humor would mesh, but it did. He also speaks several languages fluently, and he includes them in the book. Most of them are languages that I've never actually heard, such as Afrikaans and Zulu, and other languages that are spoken in South Africa. This is a nonfiction book that I would happily read again, and that is not often the case with nonfiction. I feel like I've heard their life story, and that's that. I'm going to move on, but there's just something about this. It was so gripping. I started this on a whim as I was walking to class one day, and I finished it within 24 hours, even though I was supposed to be studying for an exam. And it was not a day wasted, I'll tell you that. I still did well in my exam. Just want to point out. Studies are important. Stay in school. I also recommend The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, who also narrates this audiobook herself. This is a book written in verse about a teenager named Xiomara, who is a child of Dominican immigrants and lives in Harlem. She is questioning many parts of her identity, including her hopes and dreams, her relationships with people who have been sexualizing her body at too early of an age, but she is especially questioning her faith, and her devout mother will not allow that. She's been writing down her thoughts for years, and she soon falls in love with slam poetry, which is the fun part because Elizabeth Acevedo herself is an award-winning slam poet, so she performs this as if it is slam poetry, which it is because she wrote it. It gave me such an appreciation for slam poetry. This starts off as a slice of life narrative, so I wasn't too sure about what this was going into it, but soon I was completely sucked into the story, and things happen, and I was gasping because I couldn't believe that the plot just snuck up on me. This audiobook is only 3 hours long or something like that. So if you have an afternoon where you're doing chores or driving somewhere, or you just want to sit down and listen to an audiobook, this is the one for you. If you're in the mood for a nice lighthearted book, I recommend How to Train Your Dragon by Cressida Cowell. You've probably heard of the movie adaptation, but the movie is quite different from the source material, but I love both of them equally, just in different ways. This is much more of a light-hearted story. It kind of borders on parody of the Zero to Hero story. It's just so wacky sometimes. Our main character is named Hiccup, and he lives in a hyper-masculine Viking society where everything is about brute strength, but he is more quiet and reserved and clumsy. Many think that he's basically good for nothing despite being the chief Viking's son, until they realize he has an affinity for the dragons that surround their village. This is written like it's Hiccup's memoirs years down the line when all of the dragons have left the village, and there are so many facts about dragons, the different qualities of each species. It was like a combination of a story and a textbook. But you want to know the best part about this book is that it is narrated by David Tennant in his Scottish accent. I loved it. Like the other narrators I've been talking about, he is so enthusiastic about his performance. He really gives it his all, and it's so much fun to listen to. The voices he chooses for each character, especially Toothless, and just the Vikings in general, they were all so wacky. It fit the book perfectly. It was a hoot and a half. I recommend this for all ages. I just read it a few months ago, and I'm a full-grown lady. I still very much enjoyed it, but if you have young kids or something like that, listen to it together. Then our final audiobook recommendation is none other than Sadie by Courtney Summers. This is a mystery novel written from two perspectives, the first being Sadie's. Sadie is forced to raise both herself and her little sister named Maddie after her mother leaves them in their small town trailer park to fend for themselves. But one day, Maddie is found murdered. Sadie's world completely collapses, especially when the police aren't able to capture the killer. So Sadie decides to take it upon herself to enact revenge and find that murderer. Then our second perspective is that of a host of a podcast all about small town murders, the first subject being Maddie and Sadie. His perspective is written as the transcript of the podcast, and it takes place a few steps after Sadie in the timeline. So we can see him trying to track down Sadie, we can see the clues she left behind. So it reads like a puzzle, and we're trying to put together all of the pieces from both of their perspectives. The audiobook for this is absolutely amazing. Out of all the ones that I've talked about today, this one is by far my favorite because it felt so dang real. Like Daisy Jones and the Six, this has a full cast of narrators, but my favorite part were the podcast segments because they added ambient noises to the interviews, and just all in all, it felt like I was actually listening to a real podcast, and it kind of freaked me out at times because this is a very dark book with no moments of levity. I'm going to give you warnings for pedophilia, murder, drug abuse, and sexual abuse, but Courtney Summers does not sensationalize any of the abuse. She focuses much more on the victims of the abuse rather than the acts themselves, and I felt like it was very respectful. If you can handle the subject matter and all of the despair and revenge and violence of this, I recommend this because it is raw and powerful and unforgettable. I cannot hype this up enough. So those are the 7 audiobooks that I recommend you check out if you can. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to Libby for sponsoring this video. I love you, and I'm not just saying that because you sponsored this video. If you want to know more about Libby, I will include all of that information in the description. Let me know if you have any audiobook recommendations because I'm always looking for more. Let me know if you've read these, if you liked them. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you all in my next video. Bye!